Hello and welcome to episode number 272. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Thank you for joining us today. My guest is none other than Dr. David Hillson. You may have heard of him as the Risk Doctor, and having him on the program is a great opportunity for us. In fact, project opportunity management is actually at the center of our discussion. Here is what David says about opportunities. He says that most project managers still don't get the idea of upside risk or opportunity, or more accurately, they understand the theory, but they don't put it into practice. So in a moment, we will not only learn what opportunities are, but more importantly, we'll hear David discuss several ways of identifying as well as properly managing them on your project. Since this is the first and long overdue appearance of David on the Project Management Podcast, here is a little bit about him first. Globally known as the Risk Doctor, Dr. David Hillson is an award-winning thought leader and expert practitioner who consults and writes widely on risk management. His groundbreaking work in project risk management was recognized by honorary fellowships from both the Association for Project Management and the Project Management Institute. He was also named Risk Personality of the Year in 2010 and 11. David is an active fellow of the Institute of Risk Management and was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts to contribute to its Risk Commission. He is also a Chartered Fellow in the Chartered Management Institute. And now, here's your opportunity to learn about opportunity. Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview. Today with Dr. David Hillson, the Risk Doctor.
Hello, David. Welcome to the Project Management Podcast.
Cornelius, thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to talking to you today.
And we are honored to have you, frankly, because you do call yourself the Risk Doctor. But the first topic that we are going to be discussing today is opportunities. Why is opportunity management so dear to your heart?
I think that's a great first question to ask. Thank you, and thank you for asking it. A lot of people think that risk is always and only bad, and I'd like to challenge that idea. I've been challenging it for the last 15 years or so, with some success, so that now the definition of risk, both in the international ISO standard, in the PMI PMBOK guide, chapter 11, in pretty much every risk management standard around the world, has an inclusive, kind of broader definition of risk, which includes both threats and opportunities. And I think conceptually it's important, but more than that, it's important practically, because if we use the risk process to manage our opportunities, then we should have more successful projects delivering more value and more benefits to our organizations and our customers. And ultimately, our jobs as project managers should be easier.
So what are our listeners going to learn from our ongoing conversation here? What's in it for them? What will they have learned by the end of this discussion?
Well, I hope by the time you and I have finished talking today, Cornelius, we'll have covered the aspects of the risk management process that we can use to expose good opportunities, pick out the really good ones, and then make sure that we exploit those and capture them to create benefits for our projects and our customers. But I think more than that, I'd like to enthuse people with the idea that they really can do better, that there are ways of working faster, smarter, cheaper, and that the opportunity side of the risk process will help them to achieve those goals.
Let's zoom in a bit more on the opportunities. What are some of the reasons why opportunities matter to our projects?
Well, I'd like to go back to what I call a kind of proto-definition or a pre-definition of risk. There are lots of long definitions. I expect you probably know the PMBOK guide definition of risk, but I start with just 3 words. I define risk as uncertainty that matters, because all risks are uncertainties, but not all uncertainties are risks. There are lots of irrelevant uncertainties out there in the world. And so what we have to do is to find the ones that matter. And the ones that matter are those that could affect our objectives. And the thing that's important to recognize is that some uncertainties matter because they could hinder us, stop us from getting to our objectives. And of course, those are the threats. They could delay us, they could cost more money, they could lead to performance shortfalls or accidents, all sorts of things bad could happen. And we need to recognize those and manage them. But there are also uncertainties that matter because they could help us to achieve our objectives. And I mentioned those three keywords: faster, smarter, cheaper. If there are ways that we can proactively look out for, ways that will save us time, save us money, enhance our performance, prevent accidents, then that should make our lives a lot easier and our projects more successful. So I think it really matters, because if we only manage the downside of risk, then we're just protecting ourselves from things that could go wrong. If we manage also the upside of risk, then we're proactively looking for things that can make our projects better and more successful.
If the opportunities give us so many benefits, why do you think that we don't give them enough importance on our projects?
Well, I think part of this is down to the way that the word is currently used in popular speech. So if you ask the man on the street, would you like to have a risk happen to you today? He'll say, no, thank you. Risk is bad. But if you ask, let's say, a financial analyst, and you talked about risks in the stock market or the bond market, what does risk in the stock market mean? It means that your stock values could go up or they could go down. It's a double-sided concept. If we think about reputation, you can enhance your reputation or damage your reputation. If we think about productivity, then we can do better than we planned or worse than we planned. The problem is that we're stuck into this negative mindset where we only think about the things that could go wrong. And I think that's the biggest reason for us not giving enough importance to opportunities on our projects. We just don't see it as a possibility. If something goes well, we think that's good luck and we'll kind of take advantage of it. But we don't realize that we can go specifically, proactively looking for opportunities and make ourselves more lucky. So I think it's down to the way our mindset works in terms of wanting to protect ourselves and just taking that kind of a man on the street view that risk is always and only bad. And I think that's a mistake.
So if I understand you right, you're not saying project managers are resistant to opportunity management. They're just not all too aware of it.
I think that's right. And if you go back, let's say 30 years, when I started doing risk management in about 1984, you'll understand I was very, very young at the time, just a boy, really. And in 1984, we were talking, or the early 80s, about a more structured approach to managing risk, and we really only understood it as bad risks. And project managers were saying, we don't need a risk process to do that. We manage risk just naturally as part of being good project managers. And we had to persuade them that there is value in having a process to manage risks. The value is in terms of capturing and documenting the risks so that we know what they are and we can talk about them, that we can demonstrate our improvement in managing risk exposure throughout the lifetime of the project. And we can also learn between projects and look back at what risks happened previously or what risks were identified and managed. And we're finding very much the same thing now, that good project managers are saying, well, of course I look out for ways to work faster, smarter, cheaper, to save time, to save money, to do better. And I don't need a process to do that. But it's just exactly the same argument that we had over threats, over bad risks 30 years ago. And I'm saying the same answer applies, that if we have a structured approach to managing opportunities, then we can do it better, we can do it visibly, we can do it traceably, with accountability, and we can also learn for the future so that each project is better than the one before. So I think the resistance is really from people who say, no, I just do that naturally. And of course, good people do. But what we want is for everyone to do what good people do. And the best way for that is to proceduralize it and make it normal.
And where do we start addressing the problem? Training, additional processes in the PMBOK guide, or is this even something where management needs to get involved? So, MBA programs need to embrace this as well.
Yes, I think it's a multi-pronged approach. The PMBOK guide already covers opportunities within the risk chapter. So since the year 2000 and the 2000 edition of the PMBOK guide, in fact, you may have noticed, but you might not, that we ripped out the old risk management chapter and we completely replaced it in the 2000 edition of the PMBOK guide. And I was part of the core team that wrote that new risk process. And there we introduced that idea of a broader double-sided risk definition, where, if you'll remember, it says that a risk is any uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on achievement of project objectives. And those three little words, positive or negative, were embedded in the PMBOK in the year 2000. And then since then, we've developed that kind of double-sided process So if you read through the PMBOK guide in Chapter 11, then we have identify risks. It says identify threats and opportunities. It says assess risks qualitatively using a probability impact matrix. We do that on a double-sided matrix with opportunities and threats. We talk about quantitative analysis and we model minimums and maximums. The minimums have opportunities, the maximums have threats. Then we have response strategies for threats and opportunities, and so on. So it's already embedded in the PMBOK guide. And training courses should actually cover that, of course, if they're based on the PMBOK or the ISO standard. I think what's more important is the culture. The culture of our organization needs to recognize and expect projects and their teams to expose and to proactively manage and capture opportunities. And project sponsors and senior managers should be looking at risk registers and saying, well, where are the opportunities? It's okay to bring me all these things that scare us and that we're worried about. Where are the things that excite us, which could help us to do better? And so I do think probably the answer needs to come from the management, from the project sponsor, from the organizational culture, where we expect people to identify opportunities as a normal outcome of the risk process.
So in order for me as a project manager to put opportunities into my risk register, I first have to find them. So where do we look for opportunities on our project? You mentioned earlier on we have to have a process. How do we go about that?
Well, the good news is that an opportunity is the same as a threat. You might think that's a strange thing to say. The only difference between them is the sign of the impact. So an opportunity has a positive impact on project objectives, time saved, cost saved, performance enhanced, and a threat has a negative impact, time wasted, cost wasted, performance deteriorated. And so actually we can use the same risk identification techniques to find both threats and opportunities. They're both uncertainties that matter, both affecting our objectives. We could just have a risk brainstorm or a risk workshop, which has two parts. Let's look for bad things and let's look for good things. But it might be better to have some kind of structured technique to find opportunities alongside threats. And fortunately, there are about 6 or 8 of those techniques. They are all listed in the PMBOK guide, but I might just mention a couple that would be helpful. One is SWOT analysis. It's obvious because O stands for opportunity and T stands for threat. SWOT analysis is normally done at the kind of strategic level, but we can do a SWOT analysis within our projects. What are the good things and bad things about our project, our strengths and weaknesses, about our team and our environment and the context of the project and so on? And what opportunities does that lead to, uncertainties that might help us within the project? So strengths lead to opportunities. And what potential problems could we have, threats which arise from our weaknesses? So we could use a SWOT analysis as a double-sided risk identification technique. Or we could think about fault tree analysis or failure modes analysis, which is a technique for finding threats, and flip that onto the upside to look for not a fault tree, but a benefit tree, or to have success modes analysis. We could think, for example, about the cause and effect diagrams, the Ishikawa or fishbone diagrams, which start with a type of failure and think about what might lead to that. So how could we be late or how could we be overspent? Of course, you could do exactly the same and think about positive things. How could we be early or underspend the budget? And structure an Ishikawa diagram or a fishbone diagram leading back from positive outcomes. So in terms of identifying these things, there are lots of good techniques. Probably the most important driver of that, again, is our mindset to know that there are good things out there that we could look for and find that would really help us in our projects.
You also wrote about one other approach that you called working backwards to opportunities. How does that work?
Well, yes, that's hopefully trying to make the process simple. It arises from the idea that risks have causes and risks have effects. So if you read in the PMBOK chapter, it says a risk has one or many causes, and if it occurs, one or many effects. And what I was trying to do was to recognize that a cause is a fact in the environment which gives rise to uncertainty, and the risk is the uncertainty that matters, and it matters because if it happens, it has an effect. So we have a cause-risk-effect chain. The cause is not the risk, the effect is not the risk, but the risk is the risk. It's the uncertainty in the middle. Now, we can use that structure, and it's quite well accepted, and we have a thing called risk meta-language, a 3-part risk description that says because of the cause, we might get the risk, which would lead to the effect, and that's quite a common way of structuring your risk description. We could take that thinking and start at the end and start with a positive effect on our project or our project's objectives and work backwards. So we say, well, let's imagine that productivity was higher than planned. That will be a positive effect, but it will be a positive effect of something that we're not currently doing. So what could we imagine that might happen that would lead to higher rates of productivity? Or we might say there will be fewer errors during our integration phase. That will be a nice thing to happen. That will be a positive effect of something, but what? So what might happen that would lead to fewer errors in integration? And so what I'm saying is let's imagine that good thing in the future and work backwards from that and use our imagination to say what uncertain things could we imagine that would lead to that if it happened? And then those are our opportunities which we can then assess and evaluate, pick out the good ones, and try and find some ways of making them more likely or even guaranteeing that they will happen.
But wait a second. If we take all these opportunities and we identify them, we work them into our projects, we turn them into tasks and activities, doesn't that mean that we're adding more scope, more schedule, additional cost onto our project, that we now suddenly need to manage these opportunities?
That's a great question, Cornelius. A lot of people say to me, you're just promoting scope creep and gold plating and unnecessary tasks. The important thing to recognize is that a project opportunity is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive effect on project objectives. Okay, these project objectives, not other project objectives. We're not talking about growing the project, about having additional scope or enhanced benefits that weren't in the original project charter. What we're saying is that for this particular project with these objectives, we're going to find a way of getting to the end point faster, smarter, cheaper. The quickest possible way, the cheapest possible way, and the most effective and efficient possible way. So what we're doing is identifying ways that we hadn't originally got in the plan. So yes, it is different work, but we're spending money to save money. We're spending time to save time. And the whole point of an opportunity is that it's not scope creep, it's not additional scope, it's finding the best way to achieve this scope. Now, of course, sometimes we do find opportunities that lie outside of the scope of our current project. Just like sometimes we find threats, bad risks, that if they occur don't just affect our project, they affect other things. And of course, what we do with threats, with bad risks, which are outside of the scope of the project, we don't just ignore them and we don't try and manage them in our project, we escalate them. We pass them on to the person or the project who would be affected by them. And we should do exactly the same with opportunities which are outside of our project scope. We should escalate them to the project sponsor or to some other project manager and say, I've spotted this good thing. It doesn't help me, but it might help you. Over to you. And then they can take it and assess it, evaluate it, and manage it in an appropriate way. So it's absolutely not about scope creep. It's about finding the best possible way to achieve this scope.
If we quickly sidestep over to quality management, Crosby said quality is free. Would you go as far as saying opportunities are free?
Well, going back to a long time ago, 30 odd years ago, I was a Crosby-trained TQM quality facilitator. So I do know a lot about Philip Crosby and his approach. And I must say, I didn't really agree that quality is free. Do you? It's a nice slogan. But of course, there's a cost of quality, and then there's a cost of quality improvement. And this is exactly what I've been talking about, that we spend money to save money. That there's a cost of quality inspections, of continuous improvement, of making sure that we have our Kaizen and Kaiban systems set up, of making sure that we have that whole sort of mechanism in place for learning from the past and so on, so that we do get those continuous quality improvements which have become embedded in the way that we think about quality. So we don't do quality anymore, we are quality. It's embedded in who we are. And I would say the same is true not just for opportunities but for risk in general. That risk management is, or should be, no longer a thing that we do. It's just part of who we are. If we're project managers, we're taking on big challenges on behalf of our customers and our organizations. We're taking risks in order to create value. And our job is to manage that risk as well as possible. Now, there is a cost for that. And there should be a line item in our project plans for the project management task and also for the risk management task. But we do those things because they give us a better outcome. You know, you might say that project management is a cost to the project, and let's just sack all the project managers and just have the technicians and engineers. But we know that wouldn't work. The same is true for risk management. It's an essential activity that we need to do in order to get the best possible outcome and create the maximum value from our projects. So it's not free, but it does have a positive return on investment.
At this point, I'd like to urge our listeners to stop by at David's website because he is a prolific writer. So do go to risk-doctor.com, and when you are there, please click on the briefings link at the top, and you will find that at the time of recording this interview, David has written 84 risk-related briefings, and much of the information that we talked about here about opportunities is, in fact, available in writing on David's website. Now, back to the interview. David, do you have a case study for us? What positive results have you seen on projects where you were able, to introduce this concept and where they did proper opportunity management?
Well, of course, I've been doing this both personally in my own projects and in consulting with my clients for something like 15 or 20 years. And so there are a huge number of case studies available. And in fact, this is quite normal practice. Some of our listeners, it might be new to them, but all the major organizations right across the world are already using this approach. So we'll find in the oil and gas sector the people like Shell and Exxon and BP and Sasol in South Africa and so on. These are all automatically thinking of opportunities within their project risk process. And then in the mining sector, people like BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto and Xstrata, it's just part of the natural way of thinking. In NASA, the defense sector, the construction sector, the IT sector, legal risks, all of these things, it's just a normal thing. One of the very interesting examples I have was, I mentioned NASA. I had a call from the deputy director of NASA, one of the deputy directors, inviting me to help them out with a workshop looking at the risks of placing a base station on the moon as part of the Constellation program to get a manned mission off to Mars. And the idea was that if we built a base station on the moon, we could have our astronauts living there, and then they'd have to get from the moon to Mars, which would be easier than getting from Earth to Mars. And the problem was that there were so many things that could go wrong that the whole development team was paralyzed. They could only focus on all these terrible things that might happen, and they were thinking, well, maybe we won't do this. Perhaps it's a bad idea. And the deputy director and his team had heard about the ideas of including upside risk in the process. And they wondered if they were missing a trick, if there was something that maybe they should be looking at that would help them to solve this particular project problem. So I went across to, I think it was the NASA Langley place in Virginia, around Virginia Beach Way. And I had a day with their risk team and some of the technical people. And we just introduced this idea of looking for uncertain things that might never happen, but if they did happen, would help us achieve our goals. And we started, I guess, about 9:30 in the morning. We had a coffee break at 11, and we found 6 major opportunities that they could pursue. And I said to the deputy director, is this kind of what you had in mind? And he said, you've earned your money. This is exactly what I had in mind. So by lunchtime, we had actually 9 really well-defined opportunities. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we developed response strategies for them, and the team went away and actually started to implement those strategies to try and make those opportunities come about. And they ended up with a viable solution to the idea of building a base station on the moon. This was probably about 4 years ago. Unfortunately, 3 years ago, the US government imposed some funding constraints on NASA, which resulted in cancellation of various parts of the Constellation program. So they never built the base station. But we solved the problem by using opportunity thinking to actually look for uncertain things that would help us. And that countered a lot of the negative thinking around how it could all go horribly wrong.
All right. Finally, for those of us not working in large companies where opportunities are just part of the way you think, what 2 to 3 suggestions do you have for us? What can we do today, tomorrow, on our ongoing projects to start including opportunities as part of our processes?
Well, I think, as I've said several times during our conversation, it's around mindset. It's around the way that we think. And I think we make risk management too difficult very often. For me, risk management is about asking and answering 6 questions. And the 6 questions are, what am I trying to achieve? What might affect me? Which are the big ones? What could I do about it? When I've done that, did it work? and what's changed? And the answers to those 6 questions are the risk management process. So what am I trying to achieve? That's objective setting and risk management planning. What might affect me? Risk identification. Which are the big ones? Risk analysis. What could I do about it? Response planning. When I've done it, did it work? Risk reviews. And what's changed? Risk updates. So I think we can just ask ourselves those 6 simple questions every day. And part of the answer to the question, what might affect me? Part of the answer is bad things, and I need to identify those, minimize them, avoid them, and so on. But part of the answer is good things. What good things might happen today that would help me to achieve my goals by the end of the day? And what can I do to go out of my way to make those things happen, to increase my chances of success, and then go and do those things? And you can do those 6 questions driving to work or sitting on the train or in a quiet moment before your day starts. Just think through the questions and at the end of the day, review. And it becomes part of our daily thinking habit, so that the way that we manage projects includes naturally thinking about and managing risk, both bad things and good things. So if I wanted one major tip, I would say think opportunity. Just include that in your thinking process, because things could be better than they are now. And if you thought about it in a structured way, you could make that happen.
David, thank you very much for your time today.
I very much enjoyed it, Cornelius, and thank you for having me.
And that was my opportunity management discussion with Dr. David Hillson. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. If you are a project manager who wants to become PMP or PMI-ACP certified, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcasts, the PM Prepcast or the Agile Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching the in-depth exam prep video training from pmprepcast.com. And finally, we have this. It's a classic but true risk management saying: if you don't attack the risks will attack you. Until next time.